She whispered, "You're hurting me," the scarred cowboy said. "It's the only force I know." Clara had been traveling for days. Dust clung to her clothes, and the sun had burned her shoulders a deep brown. Her horse, a tired but loyal chestnut mare named Daisy, walked slowly along the dry, rocky path. Clara's eyes scanned the horizon. A small frontier town appeared in the distance, its wooden buildings standing like silent witnesses to 1,000 untold stories. She had no real plan when she arrived, only the hope of finding work and a place to rest. Life had been hard lately, and she was tired of moving from town to town, always leaving before anyone could know her properly. As she entered the town, the sounds of daily life reached her ears. Children ran along dusty streets, laughing as they kicked up little clouds of dust. The blacksmith's hammer rang against iron in a steady rhythm, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from a small bakery. Clara breathed deeply, letting the smell and the sounds fill her with a strange sense of relief. For the first time in days, she felt like she might belong somewhere, even if only for a little while. Her first stop was the local ranch. She had heard rumors that they needed extra hands, and she was willing to do any work, no matter how hard. The ranch lay a short distance outside the town, surrounded by wide fields and fenced pastures. Horses grazed quietly, and a few cows moved slowly, their tails flicking at invisible flies. Clara tied Daisy near the barn and walked toward the main house. That's when she first saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet, deliberate strength. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, casting shadows across a scarred face. Every muscle in his body seemed tense, ready for action. He was working with a young horse, and Clara noticed how his hands were firm, almost rough, as he guided the animal. The horse flinched occasionally, but the man's voice, low and commanding, kept it in line. It was clear he was experienced, and the animal seemed to sense it. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about him that was both intimidating and magnetic. People in the town had whispered about him. Jake, they called him. Some said he was dangerous, that he had a temper and a past full of fights and losses. Others said he was loyal, the kind of man who would do anything to protect what he cared about. Clara didn't know what to think yet. She only knew that this man was someone she couldn't ignore. She walked closer to the barn, careful not to startle the horse or the cowboy. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I heard you might need someone to help. I can do chores, feed the animals, anything." Jake looked up slowly, his eyes dark but not unkind. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words against some invisible scale. Finally, he nodded. "We can use an extra hand, but be ready. Work here isn't easy." Clara nodded eagerly. "I understand." Over the next few days, Clara settled into life on the ranch. The work was hard, from feeding the animals to mending fences under the harsh sun. Her hands grew calloused and her muscles ached in ways she hadn't felt before. But she didn't mind. She liked the rhythm of the work, the sense of purpose it gave her. And she liked watching Jake, even from a distance, as he moved among the animals with precision and strength. Yet, she also saw another side of him. Jake's methods were rough, sometimes too rough. He pushed the horses harder than she thought was necessary and spoke sharply to the ranch hands when mistakes were made. One afternoon, Clara watched him strike a horse lightly on the flank when it refused to follow his command. The animal shied and stamped its hoof, and Clara's heart clenched. She walked over, trying to keep her voice calm. "Jake, the horse, maybe it just needs more time?" He looked at her, his eyes flashing with a mix of irritation and surprise. "It's not time it needs," he said, voice low but firm. "It needs respect. It needs to learn its place. Clara swallowed. There was something in his tone that made her pause. She knew he had been through things that hardened a person and left scars both outside and inside. But she also couldn't ignore the feeling that the force he used might be hurting not only the animals, but also himself. Despite her fear, Clara began to approach him cautiously, trying to understand him. She noticed small gestures that betrayed the man beneath the rough exterior. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, Jake would whisper to the horses softly, his voice gentle, almost tender. He would pause and watch them with a careful eye, checking for injuries, brushing dirt off their coats. It was in these moments that Clara saw the contradiction in him. A man shaped by hardship who knew only force, yet still capable of quiet care. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara found Jake alone near the fence line. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the fields. The wind stirred the tall grass, and the horses moved slowly in the distance. Clara approached quietly. "You work too hard," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Jake didn't look at her at first. He was watching the horizon, as if lost in thought. "Hard work is all I know," he said finally. "It's the only way to survive out here." Clara stepped closer, sensing the weight of his words. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, but she held back. "Maybe there's another way," she said. "A way that doesn't hurt you or anyone else." Ah! He glanced at her, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't quite name. Pain, fear, maybe regret. He shook his head slightly. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Force. It's the only language I've ever learned. Everything else has let me down." Clara felt a pang in her chest. She had seen the scars on his face, the hands that bore the marks of old fights and long days of labor. She realized then that he carried invisible scars too, from a life that had demanded he be hard, unyielding, and untrusting. Yet, despite it all, she felt a strange connection forming between them, a fragile thread of understanding and compassion. Days passed, and Clara continued to work on the ranch, learning the rhythms of life there. She learned the names of all the horses and cows, how to mend fences, and even how to handle the young colts with care. She also learned more about Jake, piece by piece. Through small conversations and quiet observations, he rarely spoke about his past, but his actions spoke volumes. There was a man who had known pain, who had been forced to fight for survival, yet beneath it all he had a capacity for loyalty and care that was hidden behind the scars. One afternoon, Clara was leading a young horse out to the pasture when she stumbled. The horse reared slightly, startled by the sudden movement, and Clara's arm scraped against the fence. She cried out softly. Jake appeared almost instantly, moving with a speed and strength that startled her. He steadied the horse and helped her regain her footing. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard. I think so," she said, trying to hide the pain in her voice. Jake nodded, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "Be careful," he said simply, then turned back to the horse. In that moment, Clara realized something important. Jake wasn't just a man shaped by force and hardship. He was a man capable of care, if only someone could reach past the walls he had built around himself. And Clara, despite her fear and uncertainty, felt determined to be that person. That night, as the stars spread across the sky and the town settled into quiet, Clara sat near Daisy, thinking about the day. She had come to the town seeking work, but she was beginning to realize she had found something more. A story unfolding in real time, a life shaped by pain and resilience, and a man who was more than the scars on his face. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Jake would ever let go of his harsh ways entirely, But for the first time in a long time, Clara felt a flicker of hope. She felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to heal not only the horses and the ranch, but the man himself. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the ranch. Clara woke early, as she always did, to the sound of the horses softly nickering outside her small room. She had grown used to the quiet life here, the rhythm of work and the patterns of the ranch, but today she felt a strange tension in the air. Something was different. She couldn't explain it, but the sense of unease seemed to hover like a shadow over the fields. Clara tied Daisy and headed toward the main barn. Jake was already there, as usual, moving with a precise, almost mechanical rhythm. He was brushing a young mare, one that seemed nervous and unsure. His hands were firm but careful, and Clara noticed the subtle way he spoke to the horse, whispering in a tone almost too quiet to hear. It was different from yesterday, less forceful, more patient. Yet there was still a sharpness in his eyes, a tension that Clara had begun to understand as part of who he was. "Good morning," she said softly, trying not to startle him. Jake glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said. Then he returned to the mare. Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. She liked watching him work, even if it was a little intimidating. There was a rhythm to his movements, a confidence that came from years of experience. And yet, beneath that confidence, she could sense the weight of something heavier, something that no one else in the town seemed to notice. The morning passed with the usual chores. Clara fed the animals, mended fences, and helped with the young horses, whose energy and fear made the work unpredictable. She noticed how Jake moved among them, correcting mistakes but never letting frustration show too much. Sometimes he would raise his voice sharply, and she would flinch, remembering the first time she saw him handle a horse roughly. But other times, he would kneel down beside a colt, brushing its coat gently, murmuring words of encouragement. It was confusing and fascinating all at once. Later that day, Clara found herself near the barn when a new horse arrived. It was a strong stallion, wild and untrained, brought from a neighboring ranch. The moment the stallion entered the yard, it reared and kicked at the ground, trying to assert dominance. Clara stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. She knew this horse could easily hurt someone if not handled properly. Jake appeared beside her, his presence sudden but reassuring. "Step back," he said, his voice firm but calm. He approached the stallion slowly, moving with a quiet authority. Clara watched as he guided the horse, his hands steady but not cruel. The stallion struggled, tossing its head and pawing at the ground, but Jake remained calm. He spoke softly, whispering instructions and encouragement. And slowly the horse began to respond. Clara felt a mixture of awe and relief. She realized that Jake's strength wasn't just in force, it was in knowing how to control situations and people with skill. Force was only a part of it. Patience, experience, and understanding played an equal role, but she also understood why people in the town found him intimidating. His presence was commanding, and he did not tolerate weakness or hesitation. As the day went on, Clara and Jake crossed paths often. She began to notice the little things about him, the way he flinched when someone raised their voice too quickly, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching, the way he carried himself as if every step had a purpose. She also noticed how he reacted when mistakes were made. Sometimes he would snap, and sometimes he would sigh and offer quiet guidance. It was clear that he was a man of contradictions, shaped by a life that had demanded both toughness and endurance. One afternoon, as Clara was tending to the garden behind the house, She heard Jake's voice raised slightly, not in anger, but in frustration. She looked up and saw him standing near the young stallion, which had been struggling with training. His hands were firm on the reins, his posture tense. Clara approached cautiously, unsure whether to intervene. "You're hurting him," she said softly, echoing the words she had spoken days before. Jake turned toward her, his expression hardening for a moment. "I'm not hurting him," he said. "I'm teaching him he needs to learn, or he'll be dangerous." Clara took a deep breath. She could see the truth in his words. The horse was strong, unpredictable, and could easily injure someone. But she also saw the strain in Jake's face, the tightness in his jaw, the flash of emotion behind his eyes. "Maybe there's a way to teach him without fear," she said gently. "Sometimes patience works better than force." Jake's eyes softened slightly, but only for a moment. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck as if the idea was foreign to him. "I've never known anything else," he admitted quietly. "Force, it's all I've ever had. It's the only way I know to survive." Clara felt a pang of sympathy. She realized that Jake's harshness was not cruelty. It was habit, learned from a life that had left little room for kindness. And yet, she also felt a sense of hope. If someone could reach him, maybe he could learn something new, something that didn't rely solely on force. Over the next few days, Clara continued to observe him. She offered quiet suggestions, small gestures of help, and patient encouragement. Sometimes he accepted them, and sometimes he ignored them. But each time she saw a small change, a softer word, a gentler touch, a moment of hesitation before using force. It was slow progress, almost invisible to anyone else, but to Clara it was meaningful. One evening after the work was done, Clara found herself sitting near the fence, watching the sunset. Jake was nearby, feeding the horses quietly. She noticed the way he moved, careful and deliberate, speaking softly to the animals. There was a calmness to him now, a subtle shift from the man she had first seen. "You've changed," she said quietly, not wanting to startle him. Jake looked at her, his eyes dark but unreadable. "I haven't changed," he said softly. "I'm still the same man. I just try to be better." Clara smiled. "That's all anyone can ask." He looked away, his jaw tight, as if struggling with his own feelings. Clara realized that Jake was not only fighting to control the horses and the ranch, he was fighting to control himself, to break the cycle of force and anger that had shaped his life, and she admired him for it. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's bond with Jake grew stronger, even if unspoken. She learned to anticipate his moods, to understand the subtle shifts in his behavior, and to offer help without overstepping. And slowly she began to see the man beneath the scars, not just the rough exterior, but the person capable of care, loyalty, and even kindness. One afternoon, a small accident on the ranch brought them closer. A young horse stumbled and fell while running across the field. Clara ran to help, and Jake appeared instantly, moving with speed and precision. Together, they managed to calm the horse and guide it safely back to the barn. The shared moment of teamwork, the silent understanding between them, left Clara feeling a deep connection she had not felt before. Afterward, they sat in silence near the fence line, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Clara finally spoke, her voice soft. "You're not just force, Jake. You're more than that." He looked at her, a shadow of emotion passing through his eyes. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. "I want to be more. I just don't know how." Clara reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. "I'll help you," she said. "We can learn together." For the first time, Jake allowed himself a small, genuine smile. It was brief, almost fleeting. To Clara, it was everything. She realized that trust, patience, and understanding could reach even the hardest of hearts, and she felt a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, Jake could learn a new way of being, a way that didn't rely solely on force. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear sky, Clara returned to her small room, thinking about the day. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Jake's past was heavy, and old habits die hard. But she also knew that change was possible, and that even the most scarred souls could find a path to healing with the right guidance and support. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that this was only the beginning of a story that would test them both, challenge them, and ultimately bring them closer in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The next few days on the ranch felt heavier than usual. Clara noticed a change in the atmosphere, a quiet tension that seemed to settle over the fields and barns, like a low cloud. Even the horses sensed it, moving with unusual restlessness, their ears flicking at sounds that weren't there. Clara couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong, but she felt it deep in her chest. Jake had been quieter too, more tense. He moved with the same precision as always, but there was a tightness in his shoulders and a hard edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. Clara tried to ignore it at first, focusing on her chores, feeding the animals, mending fences, and checking on the young horses. But the tension was impossible to miss. One morning, as Clara led Daisy to the pasture, she saw a group of ranch hands gathered near the barn, their faces pale and worried. "What's happened?" she asked, hurrying toward them. One of the men shook his head. "A storm's coming," he said. "The kind that tears through everything. They say it could hit by tonight." Clara's heart sank. She had seen storms before, but there was something in the way the men spoke that made her feel the danger more keenly. The wind was already picking up, stirring the tall grass and rattling the barn doors. She could see the clouds gathering in the distance, dark and heavy, moving faster than expected. Jake appeared then, riding in from the fields, his expression serious. "Everyone, get ready," he commanded, his voice firm but calm. "Tie down the equipment. Check the fences." This isn't a small storm. Clara followed his instructions, helping where she could, but she could see the strain on Jake's face. His hands, usually steady and confident, were tense as he worked to secure the ranch. She noticed how he moved among the horses, calming them with quiet words and careful touches, but also using force when necessary to keep them under control. It was clear he was doing everything he could, but the stress weighed heavily on him. As the storm approached, the wind howled across the fields, carrying dust and debris. The sky darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sharp against Clara's skin. She ran to the barn, trying to help the horses find shelter. Jake was there already, moving quickly and efficiently, guiding the animals and checking the ropes and gates. Suddenly, a young colt bolted, spooked by the wind. Clara ran after it, heart pounding, but the horse was fast and panicked. Jake appeared beside her in an instant, grabbing the colt's reins and pulling it back with careful strength. "Steady!" he shouted over the wind. "Keep calm!" Clara could see the fear in his eyes, the tension in every muscle. He was pushing himself to the limit, using every bit of strength and skill he had to protect the animals and everyone on the ranch. But there was also something more, a raw, unspoken struggle inside him, as if he was fighting not just the storm, but something deeper within himself. The storm hit full force by mid-afternoon. Rain lashed against the roofs, and the wind tore through the fences. Trees bent dangerously, and the animals panicked, their cries mixing with the roar of the storm. Clara worked alongside Jake, trying to secure the animals, but it was clear that even with their combined efforts, the situation was becoming dangerous. At one point, a large branch broke from a tree and fell near the barn, narrowly missing one of the horses. Clara froze, her heart racing. Jake grabbed her arm, pulling her back just in time. "Stay close," he shouted. "We have to keep moving." The intensity of the storm forced them all to act quickly. Clara could see the exhaustion on Jake's face, the way his hand shook slightly despite his usual control. He barked orders to the ranch hands, moved animals to safer areas, and even stepped into the rain without hesitation to secure a loose gate. But there was a moment when he paused, his eyes darkening as a wave of frustration and helplessness washed over him. "You're pushing too hard!" Clara shouted over the wind, worried for him. He turned to her, his expression hard and raw. "I can't stop," he said, voice tight. "If I don't act, everything will be lost. I've done things my whole life the only way I know how. Force, action, control. This is no different." Clara felt a mix of fear and sadness. She understood that he was doing everything he could, but she also saw the toll it was taking on him. His body was tense, his face pale, and his hands were beginning to bleed from rope burns and cuts. It was clear that he was reaching the limit of what he could endure, and yet he refused to step back. Hours passed, the storm showing no sign of letting up. Clara and Jake worked tirelessly, moving from one task to another, barely stopping to rest. The ranch hands were exhausted, but they followed Jake's lead, trusting his skill and determination even as the situation grew more dangerous. Finally, as night fell, the storm began to ease slightly, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Clara and Jake stood together, soaked to the bone, surveying the damage. Fences were broken, trees had fallen, and some of the smaller animals were injured. But thanks to their efforts, no one was seriously hurt, and the worst of the destruction had been avoided. Clara turned to Jake, her voice trembling slightly. You did it. You saved them all." He looked at her, exhaustion written across his face. "We did it," he said quietly, but he paused, running a hand through his wet hair. "I almost lost control. I almost let the force inside me take over completely." Clara understood immediately. This wasn't just about the storm. It was about him, about the struggle he carried every day. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of becoming the man he used to be, the man shaped only by force and survival. "Jake," she said softly, stepping closer. You're not just force. You're more than that. You're brave, and you care. You saved them all because of that, not because of force." He looked at her, and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened completely. But then he shook his head, as if trying to push away the vulnerability. "You don't understand," he said quietly. This is all I've ever known. Every time I try to do something differently, I feel weak. I feel like I'm not enough." Clara placed a hand gently on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You are enough," she said firmly, "and you don't have to do it alone anymore. You have people who care, people who want to help you. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." For a long moment, Jake didn't respond. The rain had stopped and the sky was clearing, but the silence between them was heavy. Finally, he let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly as the weight of the storm and of his own struggle began to ease. I don't know if I can change," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. "I don't know if I can stop being the man I've always been." Clara looked at him with determination. "Change isn't easy, Jake, but it's possible. And the fact that you even want to try, that's the first step. That's more than most people ever manage. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant but thoughtful. For the first time, Clara saw a glimmer of hope in his expression, a small flicker that suggested he might be ready to confront the force inside him, to try something different, to find another way to live. The storm had left its mark on the ranch, and on them both. Clara felt exhausted, wet, and cold, but she also felt a sense of pride and connection she hadn't expected. She realized that this experience, terrifying as it had been, had brought them closer together. It had shown her the depth of Jake's struggle, and it had shown him that he didn't have to face it alone. As they walked back to the main house, the first stars appeared in the night sky, shining faintly through the lingering clouds. Clara could see the fatigue etched into every line of Jake's face, but she also saw something else. A spark of determination, a willingness to try, and a quiet strength that had nothing to do with force. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more storms, both literal and figurative, and there would be times when Jake might fall back into old habits. But she also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. They could learn from each other, support each other, and slowly, one day at a time, build something stronger and better than either of them had known before. That night, as Clara lay in her small room, listening to the wind sigh through the trees, she thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the struggle, the courage, and the quiet moments of care. She realized that life on the ranch was not just about survival. It was about connection, understanding, and the courage to face one's own inner storms. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that the real test was only beginning. The storm had passed, but the real challenge was learning to face the storm inside, the force that Jake had carried with him all his life. And she was ready to be there, by his side, as he took the first steps toward a different way of being. The morning after the storm was quiet, almost eerily so. The ranch looked different, washed clean by the rain but littered with broken branches, flattened fences, and scattered hay. Clara stepped outside, taking in the damage, and immediately noticed Jake moving through the fields, surveying everything with a serious expression. His hat was pulled low, his jaw tight, and his hands were clenched at his sides. He seemed smaller somehow, weighed down by the work ahead and by something else Clara couldn't quite see. Clara walked toward him, careful not to startle him. "Good morning," she said softly. Jake glanced at her, his eyes dark but thoughtful. "Morning," he replied. He didn't speak for a moment, instead turning back to examine the fences. Clara noticed a flicker of exhaustion in his movements, but also a tension that seemed less desperate than during the storm. It was as if he had been thinking, reflecting, and planning in the quiet hours of the night. The days after the storm were filled with rebuilding. Clara worked tirelessly alongside Jake and the ranch hands, helping repair fences, clear debris, and tend to the animals. The work was grueling and her muscles ached, but she didn't mind. She knew that this rebuilding was more than just physical. It was symbolic, a chance for both her and Jake to face the challenges in front of them and begin to change. Jake, however, seemed different now. He was still firm, still direct in his instructions, but there was a subtle change in the way he handled situations. When a young horse spooked, he didn't immediately reach for force. Instead, he would pause, take a breath, and guide the animal with a mixture of quiet authority and patience. Clara noticed these small changes, and each time she saw them, a sense of hope grew inside her. One afternoon, as they worked to repair a broken gate, Jake paused and leaned against the wood, wiping sweat from his forehead. Clara approached, carrying a bundle of nails. "You've been working too hard," she said gently. "You need a break." He shook his head. "I can't. If I stop, nothing will get done." I've always done everything myself, and I've always used the only way I know to keep control. Clara set the nails down and placed a hand on his arm. Jake, maybe there's another way to keep control. You've already proven you can be strong. Now you can prove you can be careful too. You don't have to use force every time. Jake looked at her, a flicker of emotion passing through his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if considering her words for the first time in years. Finally, he sighed. I don't know if I can, he admitted quietly. I've spent my whole life relying on force. It's all I've ever trusted. If I stop, if I change, what will happen? Clara smiled gently. You'll learn, and I'll help you. You don't have to do it alone. That evening, after the work was done, they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the evening. Crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustling of leaves. Clara could see Jake's face softened in the fading light, the tension of the past days slowly easing. You know, Clara said quietly, force isn't the only way to survive. You've survived this long, yes, but maybe it's time to survive differently. You can protect without hurting. You can lead without fear. Jake didn't answer immediately. He stared at the horizon, his thoughts unreadable. But then he nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe it's time I try something else. I don't know if I can unlearn years of habit. You can, Clara said firmly. One step at a time. We'll figure it out together. The next few days were filled with small victories and setbacks. Jake tried new methods with the horses, sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing. Clara was there for him every step of the way, offering encouragement and gentle guidance. She noticed how he began to pause before acting, how he took a deep breath before raising his voice, how he slowly started replacing force with patience. Each small change was significant, and she celebrated them quietly in her heart. One afternoon, a new challenge arrived. A neighboring ranch brought in a colt that had never been handled before. It was wild, aggressive, and unpredictable. The other ranch hands hesitated, unsure how to approach it. Clara glanced at Jake, wondering how he would handle the situation. Jake took a deep breath and approached the colt slowly, his posture calm and deliberate. Clara noticed the change immediately. He didn't grab the reins forcefully or shout commands. Instead, he spoke softly, moving with careful steps, observing the colt's reactions. The horse flinched and kicked, but Jake remained patient, guiding it with gentle corrections rather than sheer strength. Clara felt a surge of admiration. She realized that this was the turning point. Jake was learning to trust himself in a new way. He was discovering that he could be strong without being harsh, that he could lead without instilling fear. The colt gradually began to respond, following his guidance instead of resisting it. When the task was complete, Jake looked at Clara, a small, satisfied smile on his face. It worked, he said quietly. I didn't hurt him, and he listened. Clara smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. See? You're learning. You can do this. That evening, as they prepared for the next day, Jake opened up in a way he hadn't before. I've spent so many years believing that force was all I had. I've hurt people and animals because I thought it was the only way. But now I see there's another path. It's harder, yes, but maybe it's worth it. Clara reached for his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. It's worth it, Jake. You're worth it, and so are the people and animals around you. Change isn't easy, but it's possible. Over the next weeks, Jake continued to grow. He still struggled at times, falling back into old habits when stressed or frustrated. But Clara was there, reminding him to pause, to breathe, to think before acting. Slowly, he began to trust himself in a new way, discovering strength in patience, compassion, and understanding. The ranch began to feel different too. The animals were calmer, the ranch hands more confident, and the overall atmosphere lighter. Clara noticed how people in the town began to treat Jake differently as well. They still respected his strength, but now they also recognized his ability to care, to guide, and to protect without fear. One afternoon, Clara and Jake sat on a hill overlooking the fields. The sun was setting, and the sky was ablaze with color. "You've changed," Clara said quietly, her eyes meeting his. Jake shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm still the same man," he said softly. "But I'm learning. I'm trying to be better. And maybe that's enough for now." Clara leaned against him, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. "It's more than enough," she said. In that moment, Jake realized something profound. Change didn't mean erasing the past or forgetting the lessons of hardship. It meant choosing a different path, one step at a time, even when it was difficult. And with Clara by his side, he felt that he could face the challenges ahead with courage, compassion, and strength that didn't rely solely on force. The turning point had arrived, not in a dramatic moment of victory, but in the quiet, patient steps he had taken every day. He had begun to trust himself, to trust others, and to believe that he could protect, lead, and survive in a way that was kinder and wiser than anything he had known before. As the stars appeared in the sky that night, Jake felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. He had faced the storm inside himself, taken the first steps toward change, and discovered that strength could be found in patience, compassion, and understanding. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that with Clara by his side, he could face whatever came next, storms, challenges, and life itself, with a courage that was stronger, steadier, and truer than any force he had ever known. The days on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The storm was long past, but its memory lingered, reminding everyone of how quickly life could turn chaotic and how fragile their world truly was. Clara woke early each morning as usual, Daisy waiting patiently outside her small room. But now, there was a sense of calm in the air, a quiet optimism that hadn't been there before. The ranch no longer felt tense or uncertain. It felt alive, full of energy and possibility. Jake, too, was different. He still moved with strength and precision, guiding the horses and managing the ranch hands, but the hardness in his eyes had softened. There were moments when he would pause, take a deep breath, and think carefully before acting. He was still learning, still struggling against habits ingrained over decades, but he was no longer trapped by the force he had once believed was his only tool. Clara noticed it in small ways. The gentle way he stroked a horse's mane, the patient tone he used with the ranch hands, the quiet pride in his own work. One morning, Clara helped Jake lead a group of horses to a new pasture. The sunlight reflected off the dew on the grass, and the animals moved calmly, their trust in Jake clear. Clara looked at him, admiring the patience and care he showed. "They listen to you," she said softly. Jake glanced at her, a faint smile on his face. "Not just me," he said. "It's all of us. I've learned to trust them and to trust myself." The bond between them had grown stronger over the weeks. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was real, grounded in shared experiences, mutual respect, and small moments of understanding. Clara had come to the ranch seeking work, but she had found much more. A connection that challenged her, inspired her, and gave her hope. And Jake, who had spent so long guarding his heart behind walls of force and fear, was beginning to let someone in. One afternoon, a young girl from the town came to the ranch with a frightened pony. The pony had been mishandled and was wary of humans. Clara watched as Jake approached, his hands steady, his voice calm. He knelt beside the pony, speaking softly and moving slowly. The girl's eyes widened as she saw the transformation. Jake wasn't using force. He was guiding the pony with patience and understanding. Slowly, the animal relaxed, allowing Jake to lead it safely. Clara's heart swelled with pride. "See?" she whispered to the girl. "This is what real strength looks like. It's not about force. It's about care, patience, and trust." Jake stood and looked at Clara, his eyes soft. "I never thought I could do this," he admitted quietly. "Jake, I thought I would always be stuck in the way I was." "You're proving yourself wrong," Clara said, smiling, "and that's a powerful thing." The days continued in this way, filled with hard work, but also small victories. Jake's transformation was slow and deliberate, and he still faced moments of doubt. There were times when frustration threatened to take over, when old habits tugged at him, but Clara was always there, gently guiding him back to patience and understanding. Slowly, he learned that strength was not measured by control or fear, but by the ability to act with care, courage, and compassion. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara and Jake sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The ranch was quiet, the animals resting peacefully in the pastures. Clara leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling the warmth of the fading sun and the calm of the evening. "You've changed more than you realize," she said softly. Jake looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I feel it," he said quietly. "I'm not perfect, and I still struggle. But I've learned that I don't have to face everything alone. I've learned to trust, to hope, to care in ways I never thought I could." "Thaw," Clara smiled, feeling a sense of peace and satisfaction. "That's enough, Jake. It's more than enough. You've faced your past, your fears, and your habits, and you've grown stronger because of it." In the weeks that followed, the town began to notice the change in Jake. People who had once feared him now respected him not just for his strength, but for his kindness and patience. The ranch hands spoke of his careful guidance, the animals thrived under his care, and even neighbors began to seek his advice and help. Jake had earned something more valuable than fear or respect. He had earned trust, admiration, and a sense of belonging. Clara, too, was recognized for her courage and persistence. She had come to the ranch as an outsider, but she had helped guide Jake through his transformation. She had shown patience, understanding, and compassion, and in doing so, she had helped create a space where change was possible. Together they had faced storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger. One morning, Jake and Clara walked through the fields together, checking the fences and the horses. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden light over the land. Jake paused for a moment, looking out over the pasture. "I never thought I'd feel this way," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd believe in myself, or in something better. But now, I do. And it's all because someone believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Clara reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And I'll keep believing, Jake. We'll face everything together, from storms to challenges, from struggles to victories. You don't have to face anything alone." Jake looked at her, his eyes soft and filled with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, truly understood, and truly connected. The walls he had built around himself, brick by brick, were slowly coming down, and he felt lighter, freer, and more hopeful than he had in decades. Life on the ranch continued, filled with work, challenges, and small joys. But the fear and tension that had once dominated the ranch were gone. The animals thrived, the land recovered, and the people in the town came to understand that true strength was not in force or fear, but in courage, compassion, and understanding. Jake and Clara continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each shared experience. They faced difficulties together, learned from each other, and celebrated small victories, both in the care of the ranch and in their own personal growth. The quiet moments, the shared smiles, the gentle guidance, the long walks across the fields became the most meaningful of all. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jake stood beside Clara, looking out over the land. "I've learned a lot," he said quietly. "I've learned that force isn't the only way. I've learned that patience, care, and trust can be stronger than fear. And I've learned that I'm not alone anymore." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "And that's the most important lesson of all," she said softly. "You're not alone, Jake, and you never will be." The ranch, once a place of tension and struggle, had become a place of growth, hope, and connection. The animals thrived, the town respected the people who worked there, and Jake had discovered a new kind of strength, one that did not rely on force, but on patience, understanding, and love. And Clara realized something too. She had come to the ranch seeking work, but she had found a story of transformation, courage, and resilience. She had witnessed a man confront his past, his habits, and his fears, and she had seen him choose a new way of being. As night fell and the stars appeared in the sky, Clara and Jake stood together on the porch, looking out over the fields. The ranch was quiet, the animals resting, and the town sleeping. For the first time in years, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced the storms both inside and outside himself, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. He looked at Clara, feeling gratitude and connection he had never known before. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked softly. "For believing in me," he said. "For being patient. For showing me that there's another way. For, 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 for. A better way." Clara smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You did all the hard work yourself," she said. "I just helped you see it. You chose to change, Jake. You chose to be better. And that's what makes all the difference." As they stood together side by side, Jake felt a sense of hope and possibility he had never known. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined him. He had learned that true strength was not in force, but in courage, patience, and love. And with Clara by his side, he knew that whatever challenges came next, he could face them with confidence and heart. The ranch had become more than a place of work. It was a place of growth, healing, and connection. And in that place, Jake and Clara had discovered the power of trust, understanding, and the courage to change. Life would not always be easy, and there would still be storms to face. But together, they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that even the most scarred and hardened hearts could find hope, healing, and strength when they dared to believe in something better. And in that quiet, peaceful moment under the stars, Jake realized he was finally free, not from the hardships of life, but from the fear and force that had once ruled him. He had discovered the only kind of strength that truly mattered, the strength to care, to forgive, and to live with courage and heart.